Hello, I'm back again, and I am going to backtrack a little bit. And well, first of all, I want to explain we're just about done with this book, but I'm going to read over chapter 10. And chapter 10, I seem to have skipped over, and chapter 10 is pretty much about the Duke of Gloucester's birth of his two sons, Prince William and Prince Richard, and Alice, and their home in Barnwall. It's also going to talk about, the impending war and the outbreak of the war of World War II and the events leading up to it. But we're also going to talk about, um, see, this is the four brothers, and we will discuss the impact it had in Henry's life. Because as you see, this right here is King Edward, and he abdicated. Then it got shifted all to King George VI. And being the next oldest brother, King Henry had to step up. And here they are all in their military gear and in uniform. George was very close. There were so many similarities between George and the Duke of Windsor. They had really wanted, there was one good virtue of the Duke of Windsor, and he wanted to help the poor people. After serving in World War I, he wanted to help those living in mining towns. So he really had wanted you know, his life, and he passed this on to George. He wanted it to have a purpose. They knew they had to serve in the royal family. They were privileged, and luckier than most, but both George and the Duke had a desire to help people and help people in the communities and the towns of England, just help the everyday people. Henry, however, was different. He had a life that I believe was destined for the military, and he would have stayed in the military a much longer time. The only thing is, when David abdicated, everything shifted to the two older brothers. So that is something that has changed, and it changed things quite a bit for Henry and for George. And George, he really needed the support of his younger brothers, Henry and George, who had as they do in their youth, they had bit of a wayward lifestyle. They were a bit of a, you know, go out, drink, party kind of guys. But marriage for both Henry and George proved to be so stabilizing for both of them. Even though they had bits of scandal in both their lives, having children, and when you look at the children that they have now, Prince Richard is the current Duke of Gloucester. And then George, his eldest son, is now the 90-year-old Duke of Kent, and Alexandra, and then you have Prince Michael. Their children, their offspring just prove so well in supporting the monarchy. So I am going to go ahead and I will get started in reading. So anyways, in the last days of peace, Prince Henry was much with the king. Harry and George have dined with me nearly every night. He wrote to Queen Mary on the 28th of August. I've seen more of them in the last week than I have during the year. On the 30th of August, I wrote telling her that Harry went to the War Office with Bertie this afternoon, and he saw all sorts of interesting things. Just what these things were, he was doubtless not at liberty to tell. 4 days later, the war was declared. We decided to return to Barnwall, and on the 10th of September, I wrote again to my mother-in-law with a description of the harvesting. It had been rather exhausting as the weather has been so close and muggy. Harry and any available grooms, footmen, chauffeurs, etc., have been helping to load the wheat onto the carts and stack it. And Eva and various maids and myself have been putting the newly cut pieces into stooks. We are covered with bites, from harvest bugs, I suppose, and I go on. I've been asked to have a hospital supply depot here. Each village has a working party, and we shall have to send them the materials and the patterns from here, and then collect the finished articles to pack up and send off. In the coming 5 years, I was to visit the hospital supply depots all over the country. On the 12th of September, Prince Henry was formally appointed Chief Liaison Officer for the British Field Force, and 2 days later was his way to secret destination in France with Lord Gort, his Chief of Staff and Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force. He returned for a few days in November. The blackout was already in operation, and one evening we delivered some top-secret papers to the War Office. While Prince Henry handed these over in person, I was waiting in the back of our official car in the gloom outside. Suddenly, Horribilisha, then Minister of the War, came hurrying down the steps, took our car to be his official one, and the next minute found himself sitting on my lap. I do not know which of us got the bigger surprise. He retreated in a great fluster, and I was still giggling at the thought of it when Prince Henry came out. Apart from this leave and two others equally brief, Prince Henry was to be away till just before the fall of Dunkirk. Within weeks of the declaration of war, circumstances and attitudes have changed dramatically. On the 16th of September, I wrote to Queen Mary reporting the loan of our horse box as an ambulance, and that numerous workmen still seemed to wander in and out of the house, finishing various jobs at their leisure. The war is made into an excuse for everything. It was also considerable to increase the extent of my public duties. By the 11th of October, I had already accepted the presidency of the hospital supply branch of the Red Cross to add to my responsibilities as colonel-in-chief of 2 regiments. The King's Own British-Scottish Borders, the North Hampshire Regiment, and the commander of the St. John's Ambulance Association and Brigade. In 1941, I was appointed the Air Chief Commandant of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. I was soon busy visiting first aid posts and organized by the St. John's Ambulance Association, and later the WAAF at RAF stations, meanwhile trying to push through the modernization and redecoration of Barnwall, which was still barely habitable, though increasingly hampered in this work by the restraints of the rationing and the lack of workwomen. Queen Mary had been moved for safety's sake from London to Badminton in the depths of the Gloucestershire countryside. Here, at the home of the Duke of Beaufort, she had a private suite of rooms. She had her own household and a platoon of soldiers as bodyguards. But she still missed her life in London. She kept herself and the men busy by organizing what she called her wooding, daily sessions of clearing a wood near the House of Undergrowth.